Hi everyone, and welcome to another video. If you managed to sit through my Make Your Own Clipboard video, you will have heard me mention that I was working on a digital download that will enable you to print and make your own calendars. These are free files that can be downloaded from my Ko-fi page. Today I am going to be using the free basic version of Silhouette Studio to show you don't need a full graphics package to do this, which I know can be daunting for many. Other free options are Inkscape, GIMP, and now also Affinity. The process is going to be pretty much the same, tools may just have different names. The main tools you'll need is to be able to create rectangles, import PNGs, and have the ability to resize these independently. So let's start with getting the initial measurements that we need. I'm going to use one of my homemade clipboards, but the same steps can be followed to help you set up a template for however you're going to use your calendar. For my calendar, I'm going to attach the pages together at the top, but you could also do this at the side. It all depends how you're going to use and display it. I've popped a scrap piece of paper under the clip, and we need to add a mark where the clip ends, and then also at the bottom of the clipboard. We then need to measure the distance from the top of the piece of paper to the first mark, and then from that mark down to the bottom. We can then measure down from the top to the first mark, and that's 7/8 of an inch. If you're using metric, that's 2.22 centimeters, which you could round up to 2.5 centimeters. Then measure down from that mark to the bottom of the page, and it's 2.75 inches, which is a smidge under 7 centimeters. And although we measured 2.75 for the bottom section, I don't want my pages to go right to the bottom, so I'm going to do a measurement of 2.5 inches. If you're going to be using a different clip or backing board, then you would do exactly the same. You need the measurement for your top margin, where you will be joining the pages together, and then the space underneath, which is where you will place the PNG file. If you're not going to be putting your calendar on a clipboard, then simply decide the overall size you want it to be and how you want to divide that up. I have already set my page up as A4 landscape and have the show print border option selected. In the US you would use letter size. And although this isn't necessarily a print and cut project, I also have my cutting mat visible at the moment, and I'll explain why a bit later on. I'm going to be using inches today. If you're used to using metric measurements, then you can go to the Preferences menu and choose inches there under the General tab. And you can generally do this in most apps. I would also recommend for this project, if using Silhouette Studio, that you go to the Import tab and ensure the PNG Auto Trace option is unticked. I'm making two templates today for our PNG files, and I'll be using both in this project. You don't have to use both, but they have slightly different roles. The first template is mainly for laying out our calendar pages, but you could also use it for the cutting guides on your printed pages. If you are going to do this as a print and cut project, then the second template is essential. However, it can also be used by everybody, as it gives the extra flexibility to be able to remove or adjust the line that divides the pages. So let's start with our first rectangle, which is the top margin of the page and needs to be 7/8 of an inch high. We have to enter this as a decimal, which is 0.875. And as my board is 4 inches square, I'm going to make my pages 3.5 inches wide. So I've drawn my rectangle roughly the size I need, and then with the aspect ratio lock open, I'll manually enter the measurements. And then I'm going to change my XY coordinates both to 0, which can help us in a moment. For our second rectangle, I can make a copy of this one by holding down the Alt key and dragging it off with my mouse. Then I simply need to change the height to 2.5 inches high. And then I want to line them up. I do have smart snapping turned on, but there can sometimes be a slight margin of error, which is why using the XY coordinates can help. if we found the total height of our two rectangles was larger or smaller than it should be, we could enter 0.875 into the Y coordinates box to get it in the right position. So I don't accidentally move them apart, I'm just going to group those two together. Now let's create our second template, which will be made up of one single rectangle that is the combined measurement of the top and bottom half of the first one, and a straight line. So I want it the same height as this one. Draw it out roughly and insert the width. And as I'm forgetful, check the other one again and pop in that height. And now they're both the same size. And I can have my line, which again, I always like to try and draw roughly, but I know I'm never going to get it exact. The height doesn't matter, but we'll change the width again to 3.5. I'm going to pop this up at the top, select both and align it in the middle, and then with just the line selected, I know I want this at 0.875, so I can use the Y coordinates to pop it exactly in the same place as the other line very easily. If we were going to do a print and cut option, then changing it to a dashed line would then mean when the silhouette cuts it out, it would make it as a perforated line, making pages easier to tear off from the top section. So again, I'm going to select both and group them together. And then because this is going to be printed out, I'm going to change the colour and I'm going to put a light grey. It doesn't need to be anything dark because it's eventually going to be cut around to make our individual pages. And then next I'm going to select both rectangles and centre them on top of each other and then group them. This may seem a little crazy and unnecessary, but it will all make sense as we go along. If we then go to the replicate panel and click on fill page, it's now given us 6 individual templates and made the best use of the page space available. And I'm going to just select them all and group them for a moment so that I can make sure they're all centered on the page, and then I'll click on group again. If I hadn't grouped them, it would have just centered them all into the middle of the page. And I just want to explain why I've got my cutting mat on display. If we go over to this page here where I've got the same template, I select it and I hit fill page, you see we only got 4, and that's because it's a little bit confused about the size of our page. Even though it's set to A4, it's actually only looked at the height of it, it hasn't looked at the overall page size. Now we don't want to leave the two templates on top of each other, so by using the select by colour I can then click on grey, group them together, and then I can drag them away from the red template because we don't need to use the grey at the moment. So at the moment all our greys are grouped together and all our reds are grouped together and centred to the page. Next we need to bring in our PNG files, and there are a few ways to do this. We could go up to File. We do have the option there of Open, but that would open them in a new document. So if you were going this route you would use Merge, but instead today I'm going to drag them in directly from my Explorer window. I don't want to pull them directly so they're over the template that we created, as that can crop them into the boxes. So I'm actually going to make use of the grey space to the side, and I already have my folder where I saved them after being extracted open in Explorer, and it means I can just quickly drag them over one by one, and as we have 6 of the templates, that makes it nice and even to pull through the first 6 months of the year. We could pull over all 12, but sometimes it can get a little bit crowded on the screen. So let's just start with January and we'll roughly place it into the first template. And the reason we did this template with 2 different sections is because we want to centre the month only into the bottom half. So before we go any further, we need to do some ungrouping first. Once to ungroup all 6 templates from each other, and the second time to ungroup the top sections from their lower halves. And now we've done that, they're back to being 2 separate items. And we can go ahead and resize our PNG. And once we're happy with it, we can select both the lower rectangle and the PNG file and then click on the center button. I'm just going to adjust it slightly and make it a bit shorter, and then center it again. Now, as you can see, our measurements are just slightly larger than 3 by 2 inches, and as I like things to be even and to make it easier in resizing the remaining templates, I'm just going to even them up to exactly 3 by 2 inches. And now we can make the remaining templates exactly the same size. And we can do this a couple of ways by selecting them all, and then we could enter the measurements up here on the top menu bar, but I will show you a different way that we can do that. And that's by using the transform panel. And within the transform panel, we select the second option, scale, and in the bottom half, we can enter the exact measurements of 3 by 2, and it will change all of the other remaining PNGs at the same time. And then we can drag over the remaining months into their templates. And now they're roughly laid out in the template, we can go through dragging our mouse over the relevant rectangle and month and hitting the center button. Now, you could use this template to print out your calendar pages, but as I want mine to have the dashed line instead of the solid, I'm going to use the grey template, and I'll show you a way how you can do a quick switcheroo and replace the red with the grey. We'll make use of the select by colour tool again, and this time we'll click on the red, select them all. We'll then group them so all our red lines stay together, and we can drag it off to the right hand side of the page. And then if we go over to the left, we can grab the grey template and simply click on Center to Page. Because we had the Select by Colour menu open, we could have also at that point clicked on grey and then hit Center to Page. And now our months are in the grey template, it's time to look at printing our files. Now there is one thing we need to do first, and you would have to do this if you were also using the red template that we created. If we go to File and then Print, you'll see in the preview window that the lines aren't showing up. This is because in Silhouette Studio they are currently classed as cut lines, and if you're doing a print and cut, you wouldn't want or need them to be printed. So if we go back and then on the top menu bar, we can add some weight to our lines, and the larger the number, the thicker they will be. As we're using these just as a guide to cut out each page, I'm just going to use 0.5. And if we go back to File and Print again, you'll see that the lines have now appeared. And all that's left to do is to print out the page. But what if, before you print your pages, you want to add some pictures to your calendar? Perhaps you're a gardener or making a gift for a gardener. You could add pictures of flowers relevant to each month, or maybe add pictures relating to monthly events, of people on their birthday months or related to an anniversary. You can take these simple files and personalise them in many ways. If you haven't already guessed, I like penguins. So let's add one of my cute images to January. This can be done the same way we added our images earlier on. So I'll go to my already open Explorer window, select my file and drag it over to Silhouette Studio. He is a little big to work with at the moment. We'll just resize him down to temporary size for now. And obviously he's square and the area we're going to put in is rectangular. But we may find that all the images we want to bring in are different shapes and sizes. So we can get around that by cropping them to one single shape. And in this case, I'm going to use a circle. So I'll drag it over our little man. And then to place him, I'm actually going to drag him rather than try and move the circle, because the circle is just an empty circle. So it's more difficult to get hold of in position. And then once we're happy, we'll select both. And then we'll go over to our Modify panel and we'll select Intersect. And now he's nice and rounded in a circle, and we can do exactly the same to any other images that we bring in to make them uniform. Then I'll just resize him again and then pull him over on top of our calendar. And once he's there, we can enlarge the page so we can see things more clearly. And then we can resize him so he fits better over our months. But I know what you're thinking, hang on a minute Nikki, we can't actually see our months anymore. That's okay, we can easily sort that too. If we first go up to our top menu bar, we can select Send to Back and that will pop him behind the dates. The PNG files have a transparent background so we can still see him, but he does obscure the dates a little, so let's make another change first. If we open up the Fill panel, we have the option to change the transparency of our image, and we can easily do this by simply taking the slider and moving it to the right. You can also go over to the box to the right of that and enter a number manually, and I'm going to pop it at 50 to make life easy. And now, making sure he's selected, we can again send to back and we can see our numbers clearly, and he's just peeking out behind them. And now with January done, you can go ahead and add images to the rest of the months. And you may have noticed an error on the January PNG. I didn't spot it until I was partway through the video and I thought there's no point me re-recording everything, but I have made the correction on the files that will be available for you to download. I've put together July to December in exactly the same way as I did the other 6 months of the year. You could leave them as a full page, but I'm going to cut them out and put together a little mini calendar using the guidelines we added when we made our digital template. Today I'm going to be using my Fiskars paper trimmer. As you can see, I've popped a piece of black card underneath the cutting area, and you might be able to see that there's a wire that goes along here that can be used as a guide, and it lines up with a groove that's on the blade housing. There are also stops at the top and bottom of the trimmer, but I'm sure we've all been in the position where our printer hasn't fed our paper through completely straight, so therefore our printed item has gone a bit squiffy. So using the wire as a guide can give you a straighter cut. I won't cut them all out on screen today, but just to show you, I'll pop it under my trimmer and I'll line up the top guideline with the wire straight as I can without getting my head in the way, and I'll make my cut. It's personal preference which order you do the lines in, but I personally prefer to do the long ones first, and then I can go back afterwards and cut out the shorter lines. I'll go ahead and cut out the remaining pages on both of my sheets, and then when I come back we can put together the calendar. Now I have all my pages cut out, we can decide how we're going to attach them all together. But before I do that, I just want to show you this little tool. This one is by Xcut, and I've had it for a number of years, so it's a little bit discoloured and old, but the wheel at the end gives you a perforating line, which is ideal when you're making a calendar like this. I'm going to use my mini cutting board so that we protect the surface underneath, and if I just grab January, I'll show you quickly how this tool works. We want to follow the guideline that we added when we created our template, and again I'll try and keep my big head out of the way. We can roll the tool across the guideline, going as fast or as slow as we feel comfortable. The aim is to make as straight as line as possible, not win any international perforation competition, if one existed. I went a little bit wonky at the end, but that's fine. I won't go ahead and do the rest of the pages today, but if this wasn't just a demo, then obviously I would. I couldn't find a link to my scoring tool by Xcut, but some other brands like Tonic Studios and Tim Holtz do have their own versions, and there are some other options available too. You can find the details in the section underneath this video. Now you could keep your pages loose, but then there is a chance that some could get lost, so there are a few ways we can join them together using the top margin that we included in the template. Today I'm going to staple my pages together, and I've gone ahead and made a spine to cover the top section and cut out a piece of card that's the same width as my pages, 3.5 inches, and then double the height of the top section. And I scored down the centre. I couldn't find my scoring blade for my trimmer, so instead I've used a Pergamano tool with a ball end, and you can run it down the groove on the trimmer. And I find it actually works better than the original scoring blade. Then we can fold the spine in half. We then just simply need to grab our pages and line them all up. We want them as even and straight as possible around all edges, and then we can grab our spine and place it over the top. You can see the guideline very slightly. I could have made the spine a millimetre longer just to cover it, or in the template I could have moved the line slightly up, as we have that flexibility when using the grey option. Grab a clip so that we can hold everything together, and then get my stapler so we can secure all the pages. I could take some time to make sure that they're lined up evenly across the middle of the spine, but today I'm just going to eyeball it. And now that our pages are all secured together, we can pop it under our clipboard to see how it looks. It sits nicely under our clip. We can see that the top margin is the ideal height, and the months clearly on display in the lower half of the calendar. There are some other options to join all the pages together. If you have a sewing machine, and because we've used paper, then you could stitch them together. But I would also make sure you clip them when you do that, and that will then give you the option of tearing off pages again. And you could also use something like eyelets, which will allow you to thread through a piece of cord or ribbon to hang the calendar. You could also look to pop a magnet on the back, so they could go on a fridge or any other magnetic surface. And to make it sturdier, you could extend the piece of card that goes over the top down the back. And then the last thing to quickly show you before I wrap up this video, we did add a perforated line to January, so that means that when we get to the end of the month, we can easily take it and tear it away from the rest of the calendar. And that's now our completed calendar. I hope I've given you some ideas of how you can use these free files. You of course don't even have to print them out. And as I showed during the video, you can also add images to them. So the only limitation is your imagination. I will be using these files in a couple of other videos that I have planned, so be sure to like and subscribe so you'll know when they are out. Bye for now.